And the next speaker is Sven Lieber from the University of Ghent, and he is looking into a different application of the Core Criterion and Evidence vocabulary. You have heard in Enrique's presentation that it's been very much used in e-procurement, and that's where it's coming from. But one of the purposes of this webinar is also to see into possible extended uses of the vocabulary, and here we have one that is already in practice. Sven, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susanne. Let me quickly share my presentation. So can you all see the presentation? Yeah. All right. So thanks for introduction. As said, my name is Sven Lieber, and I'm a PhD student at the imec research group IDLab at Ghent University. And currently I'm working on the project FAST, where the long name is the Fast Tracking E-Government Deployment through Automated Customer Journey Development. This is a 2 years national research project in the region of Flanders in Belgium, which involves both industry and academic partners. For today's presentation, I have a bit of focus more related to the public services and CCCEV. That's why we are looking more into the public service UX perspective. So basically, what we are looking into in the project, we have a very simple use case. Let's see, we want to improve the customer journey. So therefore, we want to first to see, what is a customer journey? It's a person's experience during a session of using an application consisting of a series of steps to reach a certain goal. And we are looking into that from a governmental perspective. So our use case is onboarding in a new municipality. So here simplified, shown as the goal that John lives at a new location. And in the middle, you see the big question marks and a lot of paths. And these are a lot of ways and steps John can do in order to reach the goal. And the idea is that we find the optimal series of steps for John to reach this goal. So why do we have to do something at all? What is the current user experience of public services? From a governmental perspective, we heard the term already quite often. It's very document-based. So often you have some forms you have to fill in, and then you have other forms to fill in and other forms to fill in. And this can be very repetitive because we also have to provide a lot of information over and over again. But from a user, it's more like a coherent journey. So you have a start and you want to reach something. It's like this whole goal-driven approach, and you want to reach that goals. And also during that process, in any case, you have to provide certain information, you have to provide evidence, you have to create evidence, and all this happens in this long journey. And therefore, we're looking really into putting the E into e-government, like really taking more the data perspective rather than the document-based perspective. So for today's talk, I first want to quickly explain the problem, like what we have nowadays in public service modeling, what is missing. Then looking into the solution we are trying to give in the FAST project. I will talk a bit about the project roadmap, how we compose workflows out of conditional steps of this journey, where we then use reasoning to find the optimal steps. Then, of course, I also talk about what steps are. Basically like state transitions where we have a goal and we have to provide certain evidence on the way. And then, of course, also the cost, which is a very important factor in this whole user experience. It's not a monetary cost. So I'm talking here really more about the effort which we have for each step and for providing evidence. And in the end, if I still have time, I will look into some future challenges we are also looking into. So what are we using today? So as already explained, we have all these W3C vocabularies, and then all the ISA² core vocabularies, which aiming for interoperability on different levels. And here in the region of Flanders, the Flemish Information Agency, AIV, proposed once the standard Oslo, or also Oslo², which is the open standards for linked organizations, which basically specializes the ISA² Core Vocabularies with own extensions. And there are also multiple projects going on to provide different extensions and application profiles. And also our what we are doing, our steps description, Oslo steps, we're trying to also propose one possible extension. So how is it actually used nowadays? Public services, we have the application profile, the core public service application profile, which can be used to describe public services in an interoperable way. It already provides a lot of added value because we can already, in a machine understandable way, provide contact information, opening hours, and other kind of meta information. Also criterion and evidence. But a very one main aspect is like sometimes the description of this step, which is aimed for human consumption. It's for humans. It is a black box for machines. And this is actually a problem for us. It's hampering our automated planning approach because we cannot automatic plan if we have only natural texts. And also nowadays, evidence and criterion is foreseen in this application profile. But if it's used, it's often used on a very broad document-based level. So if you fill in a form or a request to do something, this form is seen as one evidence. And there are also no clear guidelines of how to model criterions and evidences in this specific case. So what are we going to do about that in the FAST project? First of all, as we have seen, it's about customer journey. We have semantic technologies involved in everything. So we need, of course, a lot of different expertise. But as said, we are a project consortium of industry and academic partners. So we have a lot of different expertise. For example, for what we are doing at IDLab, like the whole semantic modeling of the conditional steps. We have, of course, some UI experts, because if we want to improve the customer journey, we need some user interfaces the user can actually use. These need to be generated, which is also not an easy task because we have steps on really multiple levels and hierarchies. Of course, user interface is important, but it's only one small aspect of the whole user experience, UX, where we really have to make the research and measure how is the effort of steps perceived by users, what are the costs of providing evidences and performing steps. Since we already have a lot of public service descriptions online available in natural language, the so-mentioned black box, we are also looking into ways how we can use natural language processing to populate our data model with instance data. Of course, also we have the mentioned information agency of Flanders involved to get some expertise. And of course, also some business partners looking into the valorization of the project outcome. So, for example, now we're looking into public services, but of course, it can also be applied to private services, which also play a role if you want to move, because you have also your energy, internet provider, all these kind of things. So the FAST project in a nutshell, I promise to keep it high level. We have, of course, the user, which has certain information. And this information, we assume, are laying on a trusted server from the government or maybe another application, and consists of information which is already known about the user provided, for example, in the past. And there we also assume a graph model because we are also using RDF data. Then, of course, we have all, like from the governmental side, all these steps to provide, to execute, where we have semantic step descriptions. And our goal, the goal is to improve the customer journey. Of course, there we can now do some optimization. We use our reasoning to reorder the steps, basically, to, for example, avoid the repetitive insertion of the same information, which also adheres to the only once principle. So only we ask once at the beginning for the national number and the name, so we don't have to repeatedly ask it again and again. A different part of optimizing is what we're looking also into with personalization. So it follows a similar approach, but here we also take the user data into account. And this might be important if we, for example, have steps which are not relevant maybe for the current context of a user. So we don't even have to disturb the user. We don't have to provide the steps to the user. And because we want to improve the customer journey, we first have to measure everything. So we do some user A/B testing with John in this example and other citizens, where we provide different user interfaces. And in the end, get also some user experience feedback in terms of costs the user had, which is also fed back to our system to, for example, adjust the costs for each step to, for the next iteration, have maybe a different workflow, different steps in our journey. And as I mentioned, because we already have a lot of natural language text available, we're also looking into how we can scrape this information from available documents, forms, and websites, from public administrations, from the web. I mentioned now steps already a lot of times. So what are steps? What is the current user experience? This is now one example form from a Flemish municipality, which is about requesting that your garbage gets collected at your new address. And I guess most of us are familiar with these kind of forms. What we usually see here, and as also modeled already in some public services, this whole form can be seen as one evidence I provide after I filled it in. And so the whole form can be seen as one step. But if we look deeper into it, we see also that it's divided into multiple sub-steps. So in the header, we have to provide some identification information about who we are. And then the boxes already indicate that there are certain sub-steps where you have, for example, where you provide information about your biological waste containers or other garbage or paper waste containers. And then marked in red, this is how we have to interact with it. So we have to provide information for each of the asked data fields. So what we can now do with this whole, our whole approach, that we can break this document down into multiple steps. So we have a rich description of conditional steps, our ways to the goal. And of course, as you see here, we also possibly have some sub-steps for the bigger steps. But what do we gain with that? If we only stop now here, we wouldn't improve the customer journey at all. It's a similar experience, because for John, from his perspective, he still has to provide a lot of information. There are also, like indicated here, the request child daycare subsidy, which is a step which might not be relevant for John because he doesn't have a child. He still maybe sees these steps. So, and then he still has this whole bunch of steps. So he's still quite lost because he's maybe a bit overwhelmed of all the steps he might have to perform to reach his goal. So the heart of our solution is the choosing of optimal steps for John. So indicated on this slide on the top, we see like our whole pool of steps described using our data model, which have a certain cost attached. And you see also that we might have alternative steps to provide the same information or to reach the same state in the end. And we are really looking into steps more from a state transition point of view. So we start from a start state where we have certain information of John or don't have them. And then each step provides information or changes something in the state. So we end up in a new state. And by having a series of these steps, we hopefully end up in our goal state, which we wanted to reach. And what we are doing there then is we apply reasoning, where we're using, for example, languages like N3 to reorder the steps. So we give certain cost, and then the reasoner shows us possible paths with the least costs attached. So the optimal way basically to reach that goal. And for example, if you have multiple steps for the same thing, you can think of something like if you have to provide your national number or anything, and this can be happen via an API call to the government, or you have to insert it manually. And of course, that both are different efforts for the user in order to get this information there. So the costs are a very crucial aspect here. So we are currently looking into how we can model those. So what are they actually? So if we're looking at John again, at our user, we see that he's using our application, or he's using the interface, and the steps are really might be perceived as expensive. So we want to improve the whole user experience to get like a non-expensive way. Now, the thing is that the user experience, it's a very complex thing. So it could be that the costs are very high, is expensive because the UI is not proper for John. So he might, takes longer to do a certain step or anything. But of course, the best UI doesn't help you if the whole user experience, all the series of steps, how they are ordered, what to do, is also not really customer friendly. So we are really looking into having all these kind of different costs, and which we have to somehow feed back to our system in order to adjust also the executional costs of our steps in the end. And this, of course, helps us. This has two main advantages, is that we can also identify problematic evidences or steps in a public service that we have to see, oh wow, to get, provide this evidence, this is actually a quite costful process, but maybe our reasoner provided easier workflow to reach that goal, so we can also propose optimizations of these workflows. And that's basically what we are trying to do in the project on a high level. And time-wise, I think I started a bit late. I hope I can quickly just go over 20 seconds over the last slides. The future challenges, what we are also looking into, is you see here marked two things of the slides, the goal state, and for example, in the personal information here, some consent information. And we're really looking into shapes to describe these kinds of constraints and states. And when I say shapes, I'm talking about things which were recently recommended, for example, by W3C, the Shape Constraint Language Shuttle or the SEX specification, which can be used to define the structure of data, not to be confused with ontologies, which are talking about the data model, and which we really can use to define certain constraints, that we can describe what is our goal state, what kind of evidences need to be in there. Or might be also interesting from a GDPR perspective, you have all the right of rectification. If John doesn't want that his steps are optimized and his data is reused from somewhere else, we can also take into account if he gave consent to reuse this information to pre-fill it somewhere, or if he's doing the public service on behalf of another person, or if he has to provide an email address and he wants now to have another email address, so he doesn't want that his already existent and known email address is reused, he wants to give a new one. So this needs all to be taken into account. So yeah, that's already it.